Welcome, Dr. James Beckett, Sports Card Insights, episode about Pete Rose. Passed away last week, but collected my thoughts. They're not random thoughts, but they're in random order. Just reflecting on Pete, who older than me, so I got to see really his whole career and his demise as well, which is very melancholy. So very sad day when he passed away. Charlie Hustle always wanted to win, and I think that will to win was an important part of his makeup. Probably, perhaps even part of his downfall. Thanks, sponsors, Topps, Panini, Upper Deck, Heritage, Auctions, Huggins Scott Auctions, part of Burbank Sports Cards, Mike Stadium Sports Cards, ComC.com, and Beckett Media, Beckett Grading, Beckett Authentications. Thank you, sponsors. Pete Rose, at one point, one of the very biggest names in the hobby, certainly when he broke the record and really just kept going and kept going. I would say he was the most valuable non-home run hitter of his day, pretty much up until 89 or 90 when it sunk in that he really had been gambling on baseball. I think that is clearly admitted. It's thought that he only bet on his team to win, but he didn't bet when he didn't feel good about it, which is great information for the bookies. But this is Sports Card Insights, so I want to get into the cards, but also just personal recollections. As I said, random thoughts about Pete and his life. And he wasn't the father of the multiplayer floating head rookie card with his card from 63 Topps in the high number series, card 537, because 1962 had high number multiplayer floating head rookies. And they were even more, they were not just in the last series, but those are typically such Jim Bouton, Bob Uecker, Joe Pepitone, Sam McDowell, good players, but not Hall of Famers, but usually the toughest cards to get in the 62 Topps set when people are completing sets. I wonder how Pete would have been assessed coming up in this age of launch angle and exit velocity. Now, he was a switch hitter and also had great positional flexibility. He could play infield and outfield. He was a line drive hitter. Now, he was strong. He had power. He wasn't hitting dribblers through the infield. In fact, when he played on artificial turf, he just would get the ball through. So he got a lot of singles and doubles, but he could hit home runs. Why go for it? I was noting here that another guy, Ty Cobb, he's linked with Ty Cobb, could have had more power. Ty Cobb had more power than most people realize. When you're in the dead ball era, it's just not worth it. Tennis players, when they go to Wimbledon on grass as opposed to Paris and the French Open, Roland Garros on clay, the way you exploit your power or when you go for it is different in tennis based on the surface. And frankly, in baseball, same thing, the ball. Roberto Clemente had a lot more power than but he used it for gap. He wasn't trying to be a dead pull hitter and swing for the fences. He was trying to hit the ball hard, but not with the big uppercut that leads frequently to strikeouts. I actually think Pete's 64 Topps card's a better card. He doesn't have to share the card with three other guys. It's got the rookie trophy on it. He was immediately noticed as a player to be reckoned with. That's probably my favorite card of his Topps cards. I met Pete in the 90s. It had to be in the 90s. I actually don't remember very much. People ask me, hey, you must have met a lot of players. I probably have compared to the average person. When it's a 15-second interaction, not very substantive, it's like a meet and greet. Next thing, it's over. We weren't buddies. I don't know that we would have been buddies. We're wound differently, and yet I certainly respect many players. I really respect what they did on the field. He's a Hall of Famer for what he did on the field. Perhaps the most prolific autographer of my lifetime. Babe Ruth famously signed lots of autographs. Mickey Mantle, Bob Feller, I saw him at shows all the time too. But Pete Rose just kept going, especially these last years in Vegas. He was churning it out, so I don't think his autograph will ever be extremely valuable. But then you get into the point of if there are inscriptions or other personalizing effects, that actually can add value when somebody has so many autographs out there. Frequently with baseball card personalities, players that have cards, they go up for three reasons. They do something great, fresh and great after their career, or they get in the Hall of Fame, or they die. Now, Pete is not in the Hall of Fame at the point of his death. His cards are getting a flurry of interest now because he's in the public eye. Again, there's nobody that I don't think people hate Pete Rose. So many people love him, and the opposite, they don't hate him. They're just disappointed in him. I'm not mad at him. I'm disappointed because he really deserves to be in the Hall of Fame. But my first thought is it's a self-inflicted wound that he gambled on baseball. Now, whether or not he gambled on his own team to lose or through games, there's no evidence of that, because I think he really wanted to win, but he was selective in his bets. The other thing, he was associating with gamblers and bookies. Back 100 years ago, in the Shoeless Joe Jackson days, you couldn't even be involved with the gamblers or the bookies. And so the bookies couldn't even come in. We're supposed to hang outside. And if you got cozy with the bookies and the gamblers, you would get in trouble. And that's probably why Joe Jackson is out of the Hall of Fame. There, you can't really make a case that he threw the 1919 World Series, that he rolled over. I think he had the highest batting average and did great, but he was guilty of associating with gamblers, and maybe he didn't report it, and maybe he didn't even get any money. But that's why they brought in Judge Landis, who was a judge and was a hard nose. If baseball 100 years ago, if there had been widespread gambling and understanding of that, it would have turned into professional wrestling. It would not have achieved the national pastime without the purity, the perception of purity of motive, that both teams were out there to do their best, and that the gamblers didn't have any inside information that anybody was going to throw the game. I don't know that there have been isolated instances probably in every sport, but baseball really had to make an example of Shoeless Joe, and I think the same thing was felt about Pete Rose. He was not bigger than the game, and he was made an example. Yet another way to look at it is that maybe he's got a disability. I mean, gambling is an addiction that's a disability or a disease. He's just a victim of the culture. Now, I don't ascribe to that. I think that's a little bit like the Peter Pan syndrome, the boy that doesn't want to grow up. He was playing a boy's game that I played a lot when I was a boy. And when you grow up, part of growing up is taking responsibility. So I think Pete probably was taking responsibility at the end, but he just had an interesting way of dealing with it. And I didn't understand it because, like I said, I'm not cut out of that cloth. And yet I totally respected him as a hitter and as a guy that really wanted to win, really at all costs. On the card side, one of the things I've been reading about with other people that do podcasts and things that I hear about and talk to people is that they think if one card is 100 times tougher than another card, it ought to be 100 times more valuable. It doesn't usually work that way. There's not a hard and fast rule, but if you look up a logarithmic, I know that's more of a higher math thing, but a logarithmic scale would suggest that if something is 100 times tougher, it might be 10 times more valuable. It's like the square root. I thought you'd never use that, or 4 times tougher. If it's 4 times as scarce, then it might only be twice as valuable, because 2 times 2 is 4, 10 times 10 is 100. It's just a fancy way of saying that. But it's not. And even then, even if one card is 100 times tougher than another card, that just doesn't, again, the supply is one thing. This is more of a demand, and demand is affected by not just the scarcity, but also by the brand. I've said the brand is important. The year is important. The form factor is important. So when I look at Pete Rose cards back when I was doing the price guides and trying to get type cards, by scarcity, he's got other cards in 1963 that are way tougher than his 63 tops, which is not an easy card anyway. It's a high number, high demand, and low supply. But really low supply, you get to the 63 Cincinnati Enquirer, the newspaper-ish cards. And any of those cards in the 60s where Pete was, but they had the whole team. Pete was one of the guys. But that's a thickness issue. Then you get to the French Bauer milk caps or soda caps, whatever they were. I think they probably were milk caps. The shape, that's a certain little small circle with a little tab on it that's smaller than regular size. So it's a shape that is 100 times tougher probably than the 63 tops. But it's not 100 times more valuable. It's not even 10 times more valuable. It's not even more valuable because there just aren't enough people chasing. And then finally, the Cincinnati Reds, when they do their annual postcards that are actually distributed free in most of those years, I believe that's a little bit bigger. So again, if it's thicker or bigger or round instead of rectangle, even when it's 100 times tougher, it's not even 10 times more valuable. And in fact, it's not even more valuable, which is shocking. Now that would appear to be an indication that it's undervalued. But again, even if it were to be considered way undervalued, you could put a bounty out for those cards and you'd have trouble consummating your bounty. You say, I'm going to pay $1,000 for those 3 cards that I just mentioned, which is probably above the nominal book value, but $5,000, I think you're not going to make. Same goes for 64 Venezuelan, which is very similar to Topps, as well as the 65 OPG, 65 OPG being the first year of OPG. Those are great cards, but they probably sell for more than the Topps of that year. But like I said, I think they're 100 times tougher and they might be twice as expensive. So again, an apparent bargain based on perception of the way we look at things right now. Are we always going to look at that way? I think there'll always be some aspect of brand being important, and Topps in the 60s was the primo brand. So anyway, rest in peace, Pete. I just wanted to do a tribute to Pete. I don't know that he's one of my heroes, but I certainly appreciated the way he played the game. Even if he took out Ray Fosse and ran to first on the walks and things like that, he was making a statement that this was a game that was for keeps. Thanks, Pete. I'm not wishing or hoping or praying that you do make the Hall of Fame. I think there's a really good chance you might. I don't have a vote, but I'm not going to get upset if you do, and I'm not going to upset if you don't. I take your point that gambling has gotten so into the game, but it's different than it was because it's very transparent gambling in that the lines and the access is more transparent, where it was in the shadows when Pete was doing it. And I think that's part of the difference. So thanks, everybody. And I will see you in a couple of days with another regular episode.